The rain hammered against the mansion's ornate gates as Margaret. Chen pressed her face closer to the intercom, her thin jacket doing nothing to shield her from the December cold. Her fingers, cracked and bleeding from months of sleeping rough, trembled as she pushed the button again. "Please," she whispered into the speaker. "I don't want money. Can I clean your house for a meal, anything?" "I'll scrub floors, wash windows, whatever you need." Static crackled through the intercom, then silence. Margaret's shoulders sagged. It was the 7th house she'd tried that day. Of course no one would trust a homeless woman at their door. She turned to leave, pulling her threadbare coat tighter, when the massive iron gates suddenly began to swing open. A man stood in the doorway of the sprawling estate, silhouetted against the warm golden light spilling from inside. He was younger than she expected, maybe 40, with graying temples and eyes that seemed to carry their own kind of weariness. "You want to clean for food?" His voice was deep, measured, neither kind nor cruel. Margaret nodded, unable to meet his gaze. "Yes, sir. I'm a hard worker. I won't steal anything, I promise. I haven't eaten in 3 days." The man studied her for a long moment. She looked like she'd been beautiful once, before the streets had carved hollows into her cheeks and dulled her hair. But it was her eyes that caught him. Those dark eyes that still held something he recognized. Dignity, desperately clinging to survival. "What's your name?" "Margaret." "Margaret Chen. I'm David Morrison." "Come inside, Margaret. You look like you're about to collapse." The warmth of the house hit her like a physical embrace. Margaret stood dripping on the marble floor of the foyer, taking in the cathedral ceilings, the crystal chandelier, the sweeping staircase. She'd been in houses like this before in what felt like another lifetime. David returned with towels and a change of clothes. "The bathroom is through there. Get cleaned up and I'll have something prepared for you to eat. Then we can discuss what needs cleaning." Margaret wanted to refuse the shower, to insist she start working immediately to earn her meal, but the thought of hot water was too tempting. 20 minutes later, she emerged wearing sweatpants and a sweater that swallowed her frame, her wet hair combed back from her face. David had set out a simple meal: soup, bread, cheese, fruit. Margaret's hands shook as she picked up the spoon, forcing herself to eat slowly when everything in her screamed to devour it all at once. "Thank you," she managed between careful bites. "You have no idea what this means." David sat across from her with a cup of coffee, watching. "How long have you been on the streets?" 8 months. The shame burned in her throat, but she pushed through it. "I lost everything. Medical bills, then my job, then my apartment. It happens faster than you'd think, the falling." "And you have no family? No one who could help?" Something flickered across Margaret's face, a pain deeper than hunger. "I had a daughter. She died 2 years ago. Cancer. That's where the medical bills came from. My husband, he couldn't handle it. The grief. He left before we even buried her." Her voice cracked. "I'm sorry. You didn't ask for my life story." David's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "I did ask, actually." After she finished eating, Margaret insisted on beginning her work. David showed her to the kitchen, which, despite the house's grandeur, was surprisingly messy. Dishes piled in the sink, counters smudged with coffee rings and crumbs. She set to work immediately, her movements efficient and practiced. As she cleaned, David found himself watching her from the doorway. There was something about the way she moved, the care she took with each dish, each surface. She wasn't just going through the motions. She was cleaning like it mattered, like these weren't the dishes of a stranger, but something precious. "You're good at this," he observed. Margaret glanced up, a slight smile touching her lips. "I used to run a catering company before everything fell apart. I employed 15 people. We did weddings, corporate events, galas." She trailed off, returning to the dishes. "Seems ridiculous now." David felt something shift in his chest. "What was it called?" "Your company?" "Chen's Culinary Creations." The name hit David like a punch to the gut. He stepped fully into the kitchen, his voice tight. "Margaret Chen, of Chen's Culinary? You catered the Morrison Foundation Gala 5 years ago." Margaret's hands stilled in the soapy water. She turned slowly, really looking at David Morrison for the first time. Recognition dawned in her eyes. "The Morrison Foundation." "Oh my God, you're that David Morrison, the billionaire tech investor. Your foundation, it funds cancer research." Your company did an incredible job that night. The meal was spectacular. I specifically requested you for our next event, but your team said you'd close the business. David's mind was racing. Connecting dots, that was 2 years ago. My daughter died 3 weeks before that gala. Margaret's voice was barely a whisper. I couldn't do it. Couldn't smile and serve food and pretend the world hadn't ended. So I closed everything. And then the bills came and I had nothing left to pay them with. David ran a hand through his hair, turning away. The Morrison Foundation had raised $8 million that night. Money that went toward cancer research, toward saving lives. And here was the woman who'd helped make it possible, who'd lost her own daughter to the disease, standing in his kitchen cleaning dishes for a meal. Stop, he said abruptly. Margaret froze, fear flashing across her face. I'm sorry, did I do something wrong? I can work faster, I promise. No. Stop because you don't need to clean for your food. Margaret, do you know what I've been doing for the past 3 years? I've been trying to find you. She stared at him, uncomprehending. David continued, his voice gaining intensity. After my wife died from ovarian cancer 6 years ago, I threw everything I had into the foundation. But I was lost, drowning in grief and rage at a disease that takes without mercy. That gala you catered? I almost canceled it. I didn't think I could stand there and smile and ask people for money when Emily was barely 6 months gone. He paused, meeting Margaret's eyes. But then I tasted the food your team prepared. And there was a note tucked into the menu at my place setting. Do you remember writing it? Margaret's hand flew to her mouth. She had written a note that night in a moment of desperate connection. She'd heard about David's wife, and something had compelled her to reach out, even though she knew it was unprofessional. The note had been simple. Cooking with love makes the unbearable bearable. Even if just for a moment, this meal was made with love for Emily. You remember? David said softly. That note saved me that night. It reminded me that grief could coexist with purpose, that creating beauty and nourishment in the darkness wasn't disrespectful to the dead, it was honoring them. We raised more money that night than any event before or since. I wanted to thank you, to tell you that your words mattered. But by the time I tried to reach out, you'd vanished. Tears streamed down Margaret's face. I wrote that note for me as much as for you. I was trying to convince myself to keep going, to keep cooking, to keep living, but I couldn't. When my daughter died, I broke. I know, David said gently. Believe me, I know. After Emily died, I sold my company for $3 billion and poured myself into the foundation because I couldn't stand to be still. Couldn't stand to feel. I built this mansion that's too big for one person. Filled it with things I don't need. Because the emptiness terrified me. He pulled out a chair, gesturing for Margaret to sit. What if I told you that the Morrison Foundation is opening a community kitchen? A place that serves meals to people who are struggling, who are hungry, who are where you are now. We've been looking for someone to run it. Someone who understands both the culinary side and the human side. Someone who knows what it's like to fall through the cracks. Margaret shook her head, disbelieving. David, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I'm not qualified anymore. Look at me, I'm homeless. I've been living on the streets for 8 months. I'm broken. You're not broken. You're here, aren't you? You knocked on 7 doors before you knocked on mine, asking to work for food instead of begging for it. You have more dignity and strength than most people I know. David leaned forward. The Margaret Chen who wrote that note, who built a catering company from nothing, who raised a daughter and fought to save her, that woman isn't gone. She's sitting right here, still fighting to survive. The silence stretched between them, filled with rain and possibility. I don't know if I can, Margaret finally whispered. Neither do I, David admitted. But I think we're both tired of being alone in these big, empty spaces we've built around our grief. Maybe we can help each other find our way back. That night, David insisted Margaret stay in one of the guest rooms. Over the following weeks, something remarkable happened. Margaret began to come back to life. She started small, helping David plan meals, then cooking them. Her hands remembered the knife work, the seasoning, the alchemy of transforming ingredients into comfort. The community kitchen opened 4 months later. On its first day, Margaret stood at the door, greeting each person who came through. She knew their faces, their hunger, their dignity hanging by a thread. She'd been them just months before. David watched from across the room as Margaret handed a steaming bowl to a teenage girl with hollow eyes. She said something that made the girl's face soften, made her shoulders relax. Whatever words Margaret had shared, they were the same ones she'd needed when she'd stood at those gates in the rain. Sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places. Sometimes it's not the grand gestures that save us, but the small acts of seeing someone else's humanity and saying, "You matter. You're worth feeding, you're worth saving." Margaret had learned that you could lose everything, your business, your home, your child, your hope, and still find your way back if someone was willing to open the door. And David had learned that the best way to honor the dead wasn't to build monuments or foundations in their names, but to extend your hand to the living, to someone standing in the rain asking not for charity, but for the dignity of earning their own survival. In the end, Margaret didn't just clean David's house for food. She helped him clean out the grief that had been, gathering dust in corners for years. And he gave her something more valuable than a meal, a second chance to believe that her life still had purpose, that her hands could still create beauty, that her heart could still hold hope. The world needs more open doors, more chances given, more recognition that any of us could be one tragedy away from standing in the rain. And it needs more people like Margaret and David, who understand that saving someone else might just be the thing that saves you, too.